In 2007, 2008, when the election results were contested, this led to violence on the street. And this violence led to the displacement, in the end, of more than 600,000 people. And over 1,200 people got killed.
What was unique about 2007-2008 is that it was driven by a single event, the election, especially the announcement of presidential election results. And it was explosive and became national very quickly.
You can imagine these people had to run without any of their belongings. So they had no food, they had no water, they had no shelter. They required protection, they were still scared for their lives.
Most of it was gang rapes. There was sexual violence by individuals. There was individual civilians. There was sexual violence perpetrated by gangs of youth that were associated with certain political parties or political leanings. And then we also had sexual violence perpetrated by security forces.
I think one of the greatest concerns going into this election is actually the fact that security sector reform has been the slowest part of the reform process.
The police were a significant factor in 2008, where they killed a lot of people who they said were protesting, but the evidence that came out from the Waki Commission of Inquiry was that they were shot in the back and people are running away. You don't shoot protesters in the back, and you don't use live bullet, you use live ammunition. You have got to find other ways of dispersing people if that's what you want to do.
All elections that Kenya has had since the reintroduction of multi-party politics in November 1991 have had some element of violence accompany them.
The reason why it's so present and so strong here is the culture of impunity, that politicians know that they can activate violence and get away with it.
We came from a history of use of force by state agents to coerce people into particular political positions. In response, militias began to develop around individual politicians.
A politician who uses violence has two objectives. One is to reduce the numbers of his opponents. So by simply dispersing people he thinks will not vote for him. Secondly, is to intimidate some of them who he thinks will not vote for him from coming out to vote.
It becomes an easy way for people to obstruct the participation of women in leadership or in political processes by intimidating them, by physically attacking them, or by sexually abusing them.
We have hundreds and thousands of youths in this country, millions of youths actually in this country, who have no jobs, who are underemployed, who don't have anything to do. So they're being paid peanuts, literally peanuts, to be able to then cause violence, to intimidate people, to chase away others, to make sure that the politicians' interests and ends are met. In certain parts of the country, it costs 1,000 shillings per youth to get them to form a militia squad. So you have 30 of them, you have a firm, strong group that can cause damage. And once they're armed with machetes, they can cause enormous damage.
The risks of electoral violence are, in my opinion, high. Part of the reason that I say that is that actually the violence started a while ago. If you look back over the last 3 months, the last 6 months, there have been pockets of violence all over the country.
Already there's violence in Tana River, violence in Samburu, violence in northern Kenya, violence in parts of Kisumu, violence at the coast. So we are seeing parts that were not necessarily affected by the post-election violence of 2008 now emerging in their own forms of violence and conflict.
In the year 2012, more than 400 people have already lost their lives in intercommunal conflict.
There are indications that there are politicians involved in not just fueling the violence, but also financing it.
Violence creates a situation where populations move. So you want to ensure that you have the most votes in a particular area. You're worried about another ethnic group which may have, growing numbers within that particular area. You need to move them.
Having command of troops can elevate you at the national level. People begin to respect you, you can sit at the table, and if you can show you can deliver votes, then you become a player. So for a politician in this country who's seeking to advance himself, who's seeking to make sure that he wins and wins resoundingly, violence is a very, very attractive tool. After all, if you can't get caught, why not do it?
Two of the accused persons before the ICC are running for political office, and they're running for the highest political office. One is running for the presidency, the other is his running mate.
The price of violence to the elite has been raised very high by the International Criminal Court becoming part of the Kenyan political process.
But the fact that the ICC deals with only those with the highest responsibility and cannot deal with the small perpetrators of violence has only helped to change the planning and the dynamics of violence to the extent that now the key people are more careful. We shall only be able to seriously deal with this specter of violence if we don't just leave it to the ICC. We begin to activate our own internal mechanisms so that we are able to deal even with these small perpetrators.
We've never had a situation where there's been complete commitment to actually completely overhauling the system in order to ensure that this legacy of violence doesn't repeat itself.